Thank you to Loot Studios for sponsoring this video. Recently, FDM printers have been getting better and better, finally able to handle miniatures this detailed. And being a DM, I'm often looking for an affordable way to get my hands on compelling and epic monsters to throw at my players. Which is why I've recently been exploring how we can take advantage of current FDM printing tech to print some of the awesome miniatures that are out there. So when Loot Studios reached out, asking me to take a look at their newest release of 3D printable miniatures, which just so happened to be based on the heroes and villains of the Greek Underworld, Hercules, Orpheus, the Furies, and Hades himself, just to name a few, I couldn't help but get excited by the project. Today we'll be printing a few of these awesome models on my FDM printer. Some of the terrain, as well as a few of the smaller hero and villain models, but our main focus today is going to be printing and painting this amazing sculpt of Cerberus, aptly named the Underworld Tormentor. Sculpted to stand on a 100mm base, and provided with a 5E compatible stat block, this Cerberus can and will make for an awesome game night boss fight. As mentioned, we will be looking at a few of these models today, using some various methods to print these across a couple of different FDM printers. But for now, let's take a look at how I got Cerberus ready to print. I'll be printing him up on the Bamboo Lab A1 with a 0.2mm nozzle and Bamboo Basic PLA, all using my custom 0.08mm printer profile to make sure we get some awesome detail captured by this printer. I spent some time orienting this print in a way to get the most detail in the faces and the least amount of visible layer lines on the print overall. After a bit of playing around and messing with automatic tree supports in Orca Slicer, I was a bit concerned about these chains being difficult to get free from the supports after printing. So I then tried to use my Resin to FDM tool in an attempt to utilize the resin pre-supported files that were included with this mini. But once I noticed that the only pre-supported files for this model were hollowed for resin printing, and rightfully so, this print is huge, I knew this probably wasn't going to work for my needs, as I didn't want to be filling holes on this print. So I went back to try and finesse the FDM tree supports to work a bit better. However, I'll still be using Resin to FDM for some of the more delicate models in this pack later in the video for those who are curious. By using a mix of support painting to either block or enforce supports on certain areas, I got these tree supports to a place I was happy with. This is a complex model, so some parts were bound to be tricky in terms of support removal, and this is in a much better place now, where I'm confident that I'll be able to get the model free after printing. I printed off the legs and the base on the regular textured plate for the A1, but after looking at the body and comparing the size of the model to how much bed adhesion the supports were providing, I decided to swap over to the smooth plate. Personally, I've found the smooth plate to be an absolute godsend for bed adhesion. While I go about getting some of the supports off of Cerberus, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the other things that I printed from this release. Using Resin to FDM, I processed two of the 32mm scale models, a hero, Hercules, and one of the enemies, Tisiphone. Using Resin to FDM, I enlarged the resin pre-supported files and separated the miniatures from their supports. Then, back in Orca Slicer, I was able to assign custom speeds to these supports, to help these models print a bit faster on my FDM printers. If you want to see my full process for just exactly how this tool works, you can check out my Resin to FDM guide video up in the card and down in the description below. Both of these models came out looking great, with an incredible amount of their sculpted detail being captured on the Elegoo Neptune 3 Pro. As well as these models, I also printed off some of the included terrain, which were nicely split into chunks ready for FDM printing, so with just some basic automatic tree supports, these were off to the printer. This terrain piece, the Gates of Hades, is just one of many awesome terrain pieces included in this set, and as you can see, it printed up great with a 0.4mm nozzle and some marble PLA. Speaking of the full set, let's take a proper look at this awesome bundle of STLs by the sponsor of today's video, Loot Studios. Their April release, The Trials of Hades, is packed with incredible sculpts inspired by the heroes and villains of Greek mythology. You'll find models in both 32 and 75mm scales, along with terrain, props, heroic busts, and even 5e compatible stat blocks, all wrapped into one epic package. But that's not all. Loot Studios is currently celebrating 5 epic years, with 3 brand new STL subscription options, for either their fantasy or sci-fi packs, with limited time promo prices for April. Starting at $18, Loot's new Flex subscriptions allow you to get access to their newest monthly release, or let you swap it out for a previous month's bundle. Or for $30, you can do both with their new premium tiers, granting you access to their newest release and letting you pick up one of their past bundles. And if you like both their fantasy and sci-fi genres, then their new Dual and Dual Flex subscriptions are for you, allowing you to pick up both packs at a discounted price. And make sure to get in quick, because these promo prices are only available until the end of April. This is a great opportunity to build up your miniature library, with some of the highly detailed miniatures and awesome terrain that Loot Studios is famous for, all pre-supported for resin and ready to print. So be sure to check out the Trials of Hades and Loot's new subscription options from the links down below. As expected, I had a few minor issues with support removal on the more delicate parts of this model. A few of the chain links snapped while removing their supports, and 1 or 2 of the teeth got a bit bent. But after a quick repair job with a few drops of super glue and after setting everything back in its place, I was able to come through and clean up the model. To join the main body and the back legs, I dusted one half of the connection with a thin layer of baking powder and the other with a generous layer of super glue. Not only does the baking soda help the super glue to set almost instantly, but as it soaks up the glue, it creates a hard, resin-like plastic in the join, giving a nice, strong bond for our oversized miniature. I used a hobby knife to cut or scrape down the more egregious overhangs, used a sanding stick to smooth out some of the remaining support scarring, and a quick pass with a lighter to burn away any of those little FDM strings. And now, with this model all cleaned up, keeping his base and his body separate for now, our Hound of Hades is ready for some paint. This started with 2 generous layers of Army Painter's matte black primer through the airbrush. You can just as easily brush on this primer, but using an airbrush allowed me to do 2 even layers across the whole model, without the risk of the primer pooling and clogging up details. And while I had the airbrush out, I also decided to lay the foundation for the rest of the paint job, using a desaturated warm brown to cover the majority of the body, applying this in almost a zenithal style, adding more brown to the top-facing areas of the model and leaving a lot of the underside details much darker, helping to showcase some of the awesome detail and muscle definition sculpted into this model. To give this model a bit more life, I mixed up a more saturated dark magenta colour and applied this around the face and joints, to help give the appearance of more exposed fleshy skin where blood might be flowing underneath. And finally, before moving on to brushwork, I used a thin coat of a more saturated black-brown, almost like a wash, to add some richness and darken down this undercoat ready for some hand-painted highlights. Now then, let's take a look at the base for this model. Knowing that our final look for Cerberus will probably be a little bit on the darker side, I think we want some nice bright details on some of the base. With that said, we still want to stay on theme, so all of the lovely sculpted water on this base is going to get a once-over with some thinned down speed paint purple, letting this colour settle into the recesses of the water and giving us a fittingly ominous river Styx flowing across the base, which will later get a coat of gloss varnish. For the boat sticking up out of the river, a simple layered approach, moving from darker to lighter browns, followed up by some simple glazes of a green to make it look aged and weathered. Then for the rest of the base, to keep some nice contrast and create a natural stone feel, I used mostly dry brushes across the stone, working through some cooler grey tones on all of the rocky details, and then adding some brighter creams and whites to the decorative elements, giving them a sculpted stone or aged marble appearance. For Cerberus himself, I started by building up thin layers of a quite red skin tone, all around those parts that we had previously hit with our magenta undercoat. Starting with a more saturated red skin tone will give the impression of blood flow in the recesses, making him feel more alive as we move into some lighter skin tones on top, slowly highlighting this up and creating some natural transitions into the soft brown of the rest of the model. And for those soft browns, on a model like this where we have such lovely subtle detail sculpted across the model, we can just use dry brushing to lay a lot of the groundwork, coming in with a rich dark brown for the first layer, followed up by a lighter, more desaturated brown on top, to give the appearance of this fur aging and losing some of that rich colour on the outermost areas. Before finishing up the fur, I decided to fill in the rest of the details, to start seeing the full paint job. Picking out the chains with a simple layer of silver, and I'm not too worried about getting full coverage. I want to use the silver almost like a highlight, leaving that darker brown in the recesses as an easy pre-painted shadow. And then for the claws, a layer of dark bone was highlighted up with a simple off-white stone. With most of the hard-to-reach areas now at least base-coated, this was a good time to stick our Hound of Hell to the base, so that we could start to see this come together as a full picture, before finishing up the rest of the paint job. Once he was stuck to his base, I came back in with some of our darker skin tone colours, to help better blend the faces into the fur. Then it was time for some highlights, coming in with another layer of skin tone to further define the muscles in the faces and add some wrinkles to his joints. Then I added a mix of our fur colour to our skin tone, and used this on his spine, where his fur might not be fully covering these bony extrusions. Then, after picking out his teeth, tongues, and mouths, I came in with a final hatched highlight on the fur, and picked out his eyes with some bright orange, highlighted with yellow, and a final dot of black and white. And normally I would be totally happy leaving this model where it is, but there was one more thing I wanted to try. I applied a gloss varnish to the inside of Cerberus's mouths, to give it a wet appearance. But in a pose like this, tongues out and seemingly in an aggressive stance towards someone or something, I reckon our hound needs a little extra slobber. So, with my fans on full, I set about creating some droplets of clear UV resin, letting some resin flow over a wooden skewer and trying to set it mid-air as it fell, just until I had 2 or 3 nice teardrop shapes. Then, with a bit more of that resin on the inside of his mouth and across his tongue, I set these droplets in place, mid-action like drool is being flung from his mouth. And just like that, the Underworld tormentor, the Hound of Hell Cerberus, is ready to face off against any who might dare enter the gates of the Underworld. What a fun project! This Cerberus was such a blast to print and to paint, and the smaller hero and villain models also printed up amazingly on the Neptune 3 Pro. I definitely think that Loot Studios have done a great job balancing these models. They have a great amount of sculpted detail and character to them, without compromising the actual paintability of these miniatures. A huge thank you to Loot Studios for sponsoring this video and giving me the chance to work on such a fun project here on the channel. If you liked any of the models you saw here today, or want to take a look at some of Loot's other bundles, you can do so from the links down below. And once again, don't forget about those awesome new subscription options and April-only discounts. Leave a like if you liked, and drop a comment down below. Which of these Greek myth-inspired miniatures would you be most excited to print and paint? Or, if Loot ever did a follow-up to this bundle, what hero or villain might you like to see next? Subscribe to stay up to date with some of the awesome projects that I have planned for the very near future on the channel, but most importantly, thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a good one.